Yes.
Okay, well, let's get started. I'll hand it over to you, Rabbi Bloom.
Okay, thank you very much, Rafi. So, my name's Paul Bloom, and I'm from the Israel Inspiration Initiative, whose really objective is to inspire all of you to take your next steps, whatever your next steps may be. Making Aliyah is a very big decision, and it really requires a lot of planning and forethought. And I think one of the things that we're trying to help you do is take those next steps, answer those questions that you may perceive as being barriers to take those next steps. Let me just thank a few people before we really get started. First, let me thank Rafi Shulman from Olim Advisors, who really has kind of helped us pull this whole thing together. We really do appreciate this. I'd like to thank Aaron Frolich, who will be being our first presenter from Green Peak Advisors, talking about financial planning. And then Eliana Aaron from who was very, very helpful to everyone in Eretz Israel during the period of COVID, when it was kind of such an unknown event. And she provided a lot of insight into the healthcare system and how people should actually respond to the terrible COVID epidemic. I'd also like to thank Josh Kaplan, who's really the leader of the Highland Park Edison Group. And this particular webinar was actually inspired by the Highland Park Group. Highland Park and Edison, East Brunswick, have gotten together and have a group of people that meet on a regular basis. This is actually their third meeting. And they requested to have experts in both financial planning as well as the Israeli health system to present to us some of the issues and plans associated with those two areas. We also have two other groups that are active right now, one in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, and one in West Hempstead, New York. We are about to start a new group in the Upper West Side on March 23rd. And if anyone is interested in that, please let me know. We'll get you information about that group that is being started in the Upper West Side. And it's really all the shuls of the Upper West Side. I just want to mention that there are over 230 people who have registered for this session. People from the United States, from Israel, from other places around the world. So this is really a global webinar. And many questions will be answered during this session, but there will be some questions that may not be able to answer because they're very specific. You have specific needs. Please do not hesitate to reach out to either Rafi or myself or Aaron or Eliana with your very specific questions. With all that, let me just pass it back to Rafi.
Thanks so much. Okay, so the first topic really is how to ensure a successful Aliyah and Klita. And for those of you who are not familiar with what we do at Olim Advisors, I just wanted to share with you for a brief moment just the history and kind of what we're trying to accomplish here, and then share some helpful information with you. So we started Olim Advisors back in 2016 because we recognized that a lot of people had this dream of making Aliyah and they just didn't know how to go about it. There are a lot of challenges that one has to go through. And for those of you who have made Aliyah, you can just definitely relate to this. There are a lot of decisions and challenges that you have to make before you make Aliyah. And then, of course, once you get here, the Klita, or your acclimation or adjustment to Israel, is really a big part of it. And what I tell people is that the Aliyah is actually the easier part. The Klita, the adjustment, is really where people need to figure out where they want to live and deal with the challenges. And we are here to really help you navigate that entire journey. Two specific topics that we're talking about today are really important for people who are thinking about making Aliyah and those that have made Aliyah already. And those two topics are financial security and financial planning and healthcare coverage. And I'm just going to touch upon them briefly. Aaron's going to talk about the financial planning and get into much more detail when he presents. And then Dr. Aaron will talk about the healthcare system and get into details. But they're just a few pieces of advice that I want to share with you. The first one is that it's so important for you to be prepared and have a game plan. And what I mean by that is that there are a lot of decisions that you have to make. There are a lot of choices that you have to make. And life in Israel is different. It's different from the US. It's different from Canada, UK, Australia, or any other country out there. And so you need to recognize this. And what I tell people is come to Israel with your eyes wide open. Make sure that you have a realistic expectation. Make sure that you have a game plan. What are you going to do, for example, with your investments in the US? What are you going to do in Israel to generate income? How are you going to find the specialist if you need a specialist? What kind of medication and healthcare coverage are you going to have? These are just some of the questions that people have. These are some of the decisions that one has to make. And so it's very important to be prepared. Now, we help a lot of people who aren't necessarily making Aliyah in the next 6 months, next year. It's something that they want to do maybe a little down the road. And the more time you have to prepare and to come up with this game plan, the better it is. It's never too early to start preparing. And so when we talk to people and when we help people, that's a big part of what we do is that preparation and that game plan. What goes along with that is doing the research. And there are a lot of options here. Thank God Israel is a first world country. There's a lot of financial options, a lot of healthcare options, a lot of decisions that you have to make. And sometimes it makes sense to do the extra research to look if you're looking for a special kind of medical solution, then do the research. Really make sure that you go about and you find that information. So if you have the time, make sure that you really devote the time to doing research and speak to the right people. And what I mean by that is that the people that we invite to our webinars aren't just people that speak English, and they're not just people that have the experience and expertise in the topic that we're covering, but these are individuals who have made Aliyah. These are individuals who have gone through the journey that you're thinking about going through, or that maybe that you've done already, and so they can relate to you. They understand the level of service that you're expecting. They can understand your expectations, and so when you need to speak to people, really make sure that you speak to the right people. And this is one of the main reasons why at Olim Advisors, we've created this one-stop shop for Olim, for Anglos who are living in Israel, and for real estate, which is a separate topic, but a topic that's a lot of people need help with. So if you have any questions, if you have any needs, you can always reach out to us, and if we can't help you directly, we can put you in touch with people that we know will take good care of you. And the last piece of advice is to take advantage of all the resources that are available. And a lot of these are free resources. So it could be Facebook groups, it could be online information on websites, it could be WhatsApp groups, it could be websites. There's really a tremendous amount of information. And as you're planning your Aliyah, if you're here already and you're adjusting, really search for this information. There's a lot of information that's in English. And even if it's in Hebrew, there's tools that you can use to translate. And so definitely take advantage of this, because this will help you tremendously. It will reduce the stress, the friction, the aggravation as you trying to figure out how to manage your money, how to set up and have healthcare, and of course other issues that come up. And I just wanted to let you know we have a number of resources that I'd be happy to share with you. We have a Facebook group that has almost 10,000 members, and it's really about helping each other. So if you're on Facebook, you can reach out to me. You can search for our group, and you can join and take advantage of it. We have a very active WhatsApp group, Olim Helping Olim, and just a great way to help each other and ask each other questions. And then, of course, we also have tips about making Aliyah and tips about real estate. So here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me. We will be recording this, so if you have to leave early or if you've missed some of it, we'll send you a recording within the next day or two, and you can always watch it. And please feel free to share it, right? If there's anybody that you know who wasn't able to attend today, feel free to send the recording and feel free to share my contact information. So with that, Aaron, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So since we're speaking to a wide variety of people in different places, I'll say good morning, good afternoon. And number one, I want to thank Rafi for the opportunity to present. Again, it's really the goal, of Green Peak Advisors and also myself is really to help predominantly Olim, make it their dream here. And I think a lot of that, a lot of the success has to do with, properly planning, financially planning, etc. And that's what we do at Green Peak Advisors. I'm a certified financial planner, locally trained in Israel. also licensed investment advisor too. So we try to provide an end-to-end service, clients looking for holistic financial planning, looking for help just even on a consultation basis as well. And obviously we also do investment management in both the US and in Israel. Because, there is there are people here who are already in Israel, people thinking about Aliyah. I'm going to talk in, very broad terms. And of course, feel free to have questions, and I'll be happy to try and answer. And also, if you have more specific things, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm always glad to get on a call or a Zoom and try and offer assistance. So one of the things that, in terms of making Aliyah, Rafi actually sort of alluded to it already, is the idea of planning. And so some of the things I want to cover is just generally speaking, how to budget, managing your finances in a couple, 2 different countries, which can be complex. Understanding the tax planning and compliance elements to living in Israel, being an Olim, how does that, impact you financially? Obviously, a big part, a lot of questions I get is regarding investing. How do I invest? What are the options that I have? If I'm a U.S. taxpayer, if I'm a non-U.S. taxpayer, and also retiring in Israel. So, whether you have been living in Israel for 20 years and you built up a retirement in Israel, but you may have assets and investments in the States, or older retirement accounts, or inherited retirement accounts from family members. There's a lot of planning needs to go into how do you create the right retirement. Rafi, you want to move down? Okay. So obviously, understanding the tax system in Israel is very important. It works differently than in the States, especially when it comes to investments, for example. So different tax rates. In Israel, for example, on certain investments, you have a specific capital gains rate. In the States, it might be a marginal, rate. So understanding the working with, I would say, the proper, tax advisors is crucial. Part of what we do at Green Peak is also helping clients coordinate all this stuff, in one place. So I think that, a number of years ago, someone would make Aliyah and they wouldn't know who to talk to, their insurance person, their investment person, mortgage consultant, real estate people, tax advisors, and it gets very overwhelming. And so that's part of what we do at Green Peak, is we help people coordinate everything together, estate planning, et cetera. So having all these types of services at your fingertips and understanding, who to speak to, who can really give you proper service, in English especially, is usually an important thing. So that's part of what we do. So first of all, understanding the tax regime. Obviously, if I'm talking to people that are just making Aliyah, you have a 10-year tax holiday, which is very, very important to take advantage of. One of the questions that I had before was someone from Canada is making Aliyah, wants to sell his property. And this is a good example, wants to sell his property in Canada, and maybe was it to purchase another property here, but he wasn't going to use the entire amount. What should he do with that money? Should he leave it in Canada? Should he bring it over to Israel? What happens if you bring it over to Israel? Once the money moves from one jurisdiction to the next, your tax holiday basically goes away on those funds. The tax holiday basically is saying that you're not going to be taxed on foreign income, okay? And that could be from investments, that can also be from work that you do in that country as well. So once you move that money over, that's not necessarily a tax event. But once it's in Israel and you decide to invest it in shekels, which, by the way, could be a good idea depending on what you want to do with that money. But you should be aware, once you bring it over, then that money is not subject anymore to that tax holiday. So it's very important to understand all the nuances here. Again, no tax event to move. I get this question also a lot of times. Oh, if I transfer money from one place to another, what does that do for my taxes? And I say that in and of itself is not a tax event, but you do need to be aware of and take advantage of the tax holiday that you have if you're making Aliyah. And a lot of tax planning can go into your investments, your retirements. If you're moving, before you're, right before you're retiring, or you're in that phase of life where you're about to retire, working with a tax advisor, working with an investment advisor can be very, very helpful. There are a lot of different tax strategies that we work with in terms of giving our clients a lot of value there. I'm not going to talk too much about housing and real estate. We all know the prices in Israel are very expensive. But that being said, working with an Olim advisors or another good real estate agent can help you walk through that whole process. Working with good mortgage consultants can help you as well in terms of helping you finance your home. And also, understanding, I would say, structuring, like if you're about to buy something and you want to structure the payment schedule in a certain way also is important, right? Because if you're bringing over money in a foreign currency like dollars or Canadian dollars or pounds, trying to mitigate some of that currency risk is very important. And through structuring your purchase, there can be different strategies that you can put in place, so to speak. And that likewise, it's similar, but maybe on a smaller scale. If you're retiring, for example, and you have income streams coming from the States in dollars, I'm just giving an example of someone making Aliyah from the US, understanding how you can mitigate some of that currency risk, whether it's bringing it over in different chunks, converting it, not trying to time the market necessarily, but having a strategy in place can be very, very important in terms of on the currency exchange side. And potentially also having money, more exposure to Israeli shekels is also, in my opinion, from an overall risk perspective, an important thing to think about. I'm not going to talk so much about healthcare and insurance because I'm going to give the next speaker that. But I would say from a financial planning perspective, and I do this quite often with clients who are especially making Aliyah or work, coming from different countries. I'll give an example. Let's say you've been paying into a long-term care program for many, many years, and now you're making Aliyah. Is that long-term care program, does that apply in Israel? Many instances it doesn't. If you have life insurance policies abroad, if you have other types of insurances, looking at everything holistically, I think is very, very important. And therefore, working with somebody in Israel who understands the complexities in both jurisdictions and can help you create the optimal solution to mitigate risk is crucial. In Israel, for example, there's all sorts of different solutions in terms of mitigating large financial risk when it comes to healthcare, and those things need to be explored. It's also, by the way, I see this on life insurance as well, where I have clients that have very cheap policies in the States. They come to Israel, maybe they don't need to get life insurance in Israel. They have coverage from the States that they can continue to maintain. Retirement planning, again, it's a very individual thing, but it's very important to be able to understand how you're going to retire comfortably in Israel, and we'll talk about that a little bit more going forward. Rafi, you want to move?
Just before we move on, just a couple of quick points just about a few of the topics you mentioned. One thing with managing currency exchange, so I agree with Aaron, you don't want to really time the market because no one really knows what's going to happen. But one of the things you can keep in mind, especially if you want to transfer a lot of money, if you're buying a home, there are ways to transfer money and keep it in dollars, and then you can convert it when you're ready. The reason I bring this up is that sometimes it can take a few days, a few weeks, sometimes even to set up your account, whether you're transferring it from a bank to a bank or through a money transfer company. And so what we recommend to people is get rid of the paperwork first, get the paperwork behind you. If you feel that it makes sense, then go ahead and transfer the money. And then when the time is right, you can exchange it. So just kind of a little bit of a tip to keep in mind. And then when it comes to housing and real estate, just so that you're aware, rentals here, if you're renting out a property, let's say if you buy a home and there's a rental unit there, you don't pay taxes, I think, on the first 5,500 shekel or so. And just it's something that a lot of people don't necessarily know, and it's specific, to taxes in Israel. But those are just a couple of tips that are relevant to these topics that Aaron was talking about that I just wanted to bring to your attention.
Right, and just to piggyback on what you just said regarding currency exchange, like a little dirty secret is you can open an interactive broker's account, which is a very large, brokerage platform, and you can convert money there with very, very little fees, for example. It's, obviously there are definitely benefits of working with external exchange companies in terms of service, in terms of what, especially American style service or Anglo style service. But that's also a tip that you can look into. And also I would agree that, if, for example, you're buying a property and the payment schedule is over the next couple of years and spread out, again, not trying to time things, but you don't have to convert everything at once. You can bring it over, you can keep it in dollars, okay? You can potentially maybe put it into some sort of short-term investment that's going to give you some interest in that time period, and you can convert it over time. I'll give another example regarding currency exchange. I did a financial plan for a client. This client had made Aliyah he was originally from, I think, Austria, but he spent many years in England. And I did this whole financial plan. I helped him also organize his investments and position things and reposition things. And then I asked him at the conclusion of that financial plan, did he appreciate the value and everything? And he said, the one thing you really, really helped me with was currency exchange. At the time, he had all of his savings in pounds, and he was earning in pounds as well. And at the time, a few years ago, the pound and the shekel were really, really volatile. He'd go into his account like 5 times a day, and he'd be losing, on paper, 50,000 shekels, in a day, just with the volatile swing. So I really helped him move everything out of pounds into shekels, which is the currency that he lives in and the currency that he's going to retire in. And also helped him create with his bank. I gave him the leverage to fight with his bank to get the best, available terms. So sometimes you think you're doing all this other stuff, and it turns out it's the small things like currency exchange, which really gave him peace of mind. Okay. So again, I mean, whether you're in Israel or you're coming to Israel, budgeting is obviously a part of financial planning. Understanding your expenses when you're looking at your retirement years, especially trying to forecast your expected expenditures is crucial. Nobody's perfect. We don't have a crystal ball, but take conservative assumptions. Speak with, if you're again talking to people prior to Aliyah, really go the length, and I can't necessarily speak about these details, but speak to people in your community that you're looking to move to. Understand a more deeper sense of what how much things are going to cost there. Things are going to cost different if you're going to live up in Katsrin or in the periphery, as they say, versus Tel Aviv or Ramat Gan or Hashmonaim or Efrat. Okay, you need to really do that research. Really try to understand also how you spend. It will really help you understand what your income needs are going to be. Okay, and then you can really plan, right? So if your income needs are going to be X, then you can create a portfolio that's going to create that income stream, or you're going to have retirement accounts that you're drawing down from. So it's very, very important to understand your expenses. Understanding, and this is also going to speak a little bit more to people that are already living in Israel. Many times you can really find more margin, as they say, at the end of every month, by just looking at your expenses and optimizing them. So a lot of times, especially when it comes to looking at larger ticket items, things that you're spending a lot of money on, potentially like insurances, for example, speak to your insurance agent, see if you can get better rates, see if you can customize your policies, tailor them down to what you actually need. A lot of times Americans, by the way, or Olim in general, are sold, the premium, right? So for example, when you come here, you think you have to get the highest level of, healthcare. Well, maybe you don't need the highest level of healthcare. You just need the middle ground, right? And you can use that other money to allocate it to something else. So look at your budget, look at, the big line items, and see where you can squeeze out more money. I highly recommend having a solid emergency fund, generally speaking, whether you're, that's just a general type of a tip in terms of financial planning. But I do think it is important, and a lot of Olim do utilize their their foreign credit cards, and they continue using their US accounts, for example. what I would recommend is also having a certain amount of money sitting in shekels. Okay, it doesn't have to be sitting in your checking account doing nothing. It can be invested. There are certain options that you have that are solid and safe, but I would recommend having a certain amount of money in shekels in the event of an emergency. What else? And I spoke a little bit about currency exposure risk. We can move on to the next. I briefly talked about the tax treaty. It's very important to speak to an accountant before you come, understand the nuances of the tax treaty, how you're not going to be double taxed, and a lot of this also is very individual. If you're, depending on where you are in life, where are you working, how are you set up, are you retired, are you working in the States, are you working in Israel, to understand how this really can affect your, you on a personal level. I've kind of already touched upon a lot of these things. Social Security, for example, not taxed in Israel. Understanding other tax-advantaged type of accounts. For example, in Israel, you have there's what's called the Keren Ishtalmut Fund. If you're working, or depending on how your accountant also treats it, but sometimes also accountants say it's okay for Americans to also have a Keren Ishtalmut as a self-employed. But either way, that fund, for example, is something you can contribute towards. It grows tax-free in Israel. Okay, so talking to, let's say, people that have already, are living in Israel for many, many years, and maybe have, hundreds of thousands or $500,000 or $1 million shekels in that type of product. Using that product, I'm doing that now with a client. It's the money is not there just to grow. It's also there to be used at some point. And some people get stuck in the idea of that, oh, it's growing tax-free, I don't really want to take money out. But that's also an opportunity to especially if you need some extra income, to take out some money and create basically a tax-free type of income, for example. So speak with a financial advisor, speak with somebody here, see how these products can be appropriate for you. A lot of the financial products I'll talk about in a second are not, generally speaking, in Israel, are not appropriate for U.S. taxpayers. When I say it's not that you can't buy them, but generally speaking, they're problematic from a tax perspective. We'll talk about that in a second.
I think just one point to add here with the tax-free period, the tax holidays, you mentioned, Aaron, and it's something that comes up a lot, and there's a bit of confusion here. So a lot of people that we deal with and we help are going back and forth. They're working remotely now, and they're working for a company in the States or UK or Australia. And there's a confusion about what this actually means and how it applies to the situation. And so just to clarify, and again, this is very basic kind of level of explanation, but if you're living in Israel and you're working in Israel, then you're going to get taxed in Israel, right? And I'm talking about just traditional straight up.
If your center of life is in Israel, okay?
Correct.
So it's if your center of life is in Israel, and this is, you are 100% correct. A lot of people don't understand it correctly. They think, oh, let's say they have a U.S. based job, so that it's considered foreign income. It's only taxed in the States. That's not true. So you have to be careful in terms of understanding that from the Israeli tax authority. That being said, if you do have real U.S. based income and you're able to prove it, and you're not necessarily a tax, a resident from an Israeli tax perspective, again, I would check all these things out with an accountant exactly to make sure that you're there's nothing wrong with. I'm all for not paying tax in the most legal way, but make sure that you're structuring this, correctly, and understanding the nuance of the tax treaty when it comes to residency.
Right, and the center of your life that Aaron just alluded to really applies in two ways. And the government used to say that if you spend more than 183 days in a year in Israel, in essence, more than half a year, then they would categorize you or define you as an Israeli resident, and that would have an impact in two ways. One, on your taxes, as Aaron was talking about, and the other thing is Bituach Leumi and your healthcare coverage. So Aaron, was talking about taxes. I just want to quickly mention that there's been a recent update to Bituach Leumi and the way that they view you when it comes to your healthcare coverage. And so they've recently changed it from more than just 183 days. now they actually look at whether or not you own a home in Israel, right? And it's a very important change because it used to be for a lot of people who, will rent here and go back and forth, and they were able to still get all the coverage. Now, Bituach Leumi is saying not so fast. If you don't own a home in Israel and you own a home outside of Israel and you're spending a lot of time outside of Israel, you may be categorized as a non-resident, and that could impact your health coverage. And so it's something that you definitely need to look into, because as we talked about beforehand, you want to make sure that you have healthcare coverage when you're in Israel. And so it's just something for you to be aware of and something to make sure that you keep in mind as you're planning your Aliyah and as you're planning your travels back and forth from Israel to the countries that you're coming from.
Correct. And also, I would also add here about, I think a lot of people, once you do make Aliyah, it's very important to also take care of your succession planning. It's very important to look at your wills. It's important to work with somebody local. Typically, especially I've seen cases of where more complexities arise regarding U.S. trusts and Israel, very complex, very important to work with somebody who really can give you real advice, who can write, in Hebrew, chavat dat, so to speak, in case, the tax authority comes and asks questions, you have a basis for your position, okay? For example, I've referred clients to a number of different professionals in that area, people that have a real deep understanding how the Israeli taxation works vis-a-vis the U.S. So, it's very important to also, it's not necessarily the first thing you have to take care of when you arrive, but just to understand that these things do need to be addressed.
Right, and one last thing, sorry, Aaron, just with
Go ahead.
the real estate with the purchase tax, right? And that's a big change that recently happened in August of 2024, so just a few months ago, where the government changed it to make it more beneficial for Israeli residents to buy a home and pay a lot less tax. So if you're a foreign resident, you'll pay at least 8% tax on the property that you buy. It could be even higher than that depending on the price point. If you're an Israeli, and again, if you are categorized as an Israeli and it's your first time investment, then you could pay as low as 0.5%, right? And there are a number of factors, and we won't get into all the factors here, but it's such an important point to keep in mind because it applies to people who buy property before they make Aliyah. In essence, you have a 1-year window, or sometimes even 3 years if it's new construction. And then you have 7 years after you've made Aliyah. So you can imagine if you're saving approximately 7%, that can amount to tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of shekels. So this is something that you want to speak to Aaron about, or tax advisors that you talk to, because it can really impact your decisions when it comes to real estate purchase.
And I actually, just to say one more thing about real estate purchases, and this is just general advice. I've spoken to many real estate lawyers, especially who've seen a lot of this, where parents, they'll try buying apartments in their children's names. They might have a child living in Israel. They might use, and I just general advice: don't try and do, I would say, little, shtick with the tax. Okay, you can end up hurting your children's future in terms of them buying their own apartments just to save, a few percentages. It could be amount to a lot. I'm not, negating that it's a lot of money, but doing these quote unquote games in terms of buying it in the name of this person or the name of that, I would not highly recommend not doing those types of things when it comes to, real estate purchases. Okay, one of the biggest topics for U.S. taxpayers, let me start with non-U.S. taxpayers. When it comes to investment options in Israel, really, there's no issue. You can invest in, putting aside the 10-year tax holiday, you can invest in all types of products or all sorts of different, and I'm not going to go into every single one here. But generally speaking, you can invest in mutual funds, invest in Israeli financial products like a Kupat Gam Lashka'a or Polisat Chisachon or any type of mutual fund. No problem whatsoever. So if you're Canadian, for example, and you're making Aliyah, really, if you want to have, it's very easy to invest in Israel. You're not being taxed like you are in the US. So I'm going to now shift it to U.S. taxpayers, which becomes a bit more complicated. So number one, first of all, generally speaking, especially if you're making Aliyah, and especially in the first 10 years, there's really no reason to make big moves with your money. You want to leave your money where it is, okay? Just in terms of obviously the 10 years, but by and large, it's typically easier to manage your money in the States. It's cheaper usually, and they have good options. However, what we've seen also happening over the past decade or so, a lot of financial institutions, if you've been working with an advisor, it could be at a Morgan Stanley or at a Fidelity or wherever. Once you've made Aliyah, or you're not a U.S. resident anymore, they show you the door. They don't want, for compliance reasons, they don't want to work with you anymore. So that's why working with a dual licensed company like myself, where we can actually open accounts for investors who are living in Israel using an Israeli address even, can be very helpful. Example, client of mine that been living here for decades. She received a nice inheritance from her father that passed away. At Fidelity, they basically said that we won't work with you because you don't live in Israel. You live in Israel. You don't live in the States. And I was able to help her consolidate and move the money over into the appropriate types of accounts and help her manage the money from here. So that's one thing just to keep in mind, that if you've been working with a financial advisor for many years, it could be that they're not able to actually provide you with that continued service. And on top of that, I do think that there is value to working with somebody local. Not just myself, there's other portfolio managers out there that live in Israel that also understand the Israeli system, can maybe advise you on other things that are more local, Israeli related, and also could potentially help you create an Israeli-based portfolio too, which would then give you, and I'll talk about in a second, about the currency risk, so typically, and I'll go back to the topic of PFICs, passive foreign investment companies. So basically, the U.S. has made it very, I would say, challenging for taxpayers to invest in. Basically, what it boils down to is any foreign type of fund. Okay, mutual funds, exchange traded funds abroad. So it doesn't have, not just in Israel, it could be also in England or elsewhere. In terms of what it means that basically the U.S. has said, we will, there's no transparency if you invest in these type of vehicles. We'll charge you, first of all, we'll charge you on the highest tax rates, okay, highest marginal tax rates on the capital gains, and also on all those years. So let's say you held the fund for 10 years and you made 100%, we'll charge you on each year interest as well for the taxes that you haven't paid. So you could end up, in the northward of paying over 50% tax on these type of vehicles. That's why it's not recommended for Americans to invest in Israeli mutual funds, etc. Okay, so what are the other options? So first of all, again, I do think that at a certain point, again, if you're here already and you don't have a 10-year tax holiday, so there is definitely room, in my opinion, to get more shekel exposure, either through buying Israeli shekel, investments like stocks and bonds, not through a fund. Alternative investments, you can invest in loans, or you can have, exposure through real estate, and that kind of thing. I think that there is definitely a reason to move more towards that currency. If you live here, if your expenses are in shekels, if you're retiring in shekels, you want to try and mitigate, a lot of that currency exposure to other currencies. So working with, like I said, going back to working with a professional that can also help you structure, an investment portfolio that is tax compliant can be very valuable. And in terms of, other things, obviously as a financial planner, diversifying your portfolio and having exposure, through different, asset classes, geographies, etc., obviously is a good thing to do. And anything else I want to talk about this? I think that from a long-term perspective, it's okay to be exposed to the dollar, for example, and other currencies too. But obviously, if you have short-term income needs, for example, and you need them, and it's in shekels, it's good to also have shekel options too. Okay.
You want to move on to the next slide?
Yeah, we can move. I'll just touch briefly about retiring. People say want to retire early. What does that really mean, right? I mean, a lot of people just want to have the financial freedom to retire, but they end up actually continuing to be productive and continuing to work, etc. So I would say that, again, this goes back into the planning side, in terms of your income needs, deciding, how much money you're going to need, determining how much money you're going to need from your investments and your portfolio, from your nest egg. Obviously takes a bit of analysis, right? To understand, first of all, your income streams. Do you have income coming from a pension in the States, or a retirement account in the States, or Social Security in the States? Do you have income coming from similar type of products in Canada or England? Bituach Leumi, okay, what does that give you? Am I eligible for what's called a Kitzbat Zikna from Bituach Leumi? If you've been working here and you've been saving in pension funds here, it's critical to work with a local pension advisor. I'm going to repeat that. It's very important before you retire to speak and to talk to a pension advisor. The retirement account, the retirement, the pensions in Israel can be very complex in terms of creating a consolidated plan. You could have, if you've been working here for 20, 30 years, you could have opened a variety of types of pension programs. You maybe need to consolidate them. You need to choose before you actually retire and hit retirement age. You need to make some real decisions about how to treat your pensions. An example: I'm working with a client now who he has his own company. He's continuing to work beyond retirement age. Retirement age is 67 for men. Currently, he's 68. He wants to retire. He wants to continue to work for another few years at least. But I noticed that he had a shortfall on a month-to-month basis in terms of their income. So we were able to just create a tax-free, we were able to take some of his pension and create a tax-free annuity because it was a small amount, and also give his wife a salary. And we were able to create basically a tax-free income for him. And that just had to do with looking at everything together and understanding how the taxation works. So, speaking more to people, less to people that are, making Aliyah later on in life, but more people that are already here or working here. Speaking to what's a Yoetz Pensioni, or somebody that specializes in Israeli pensions, is very, very important. Or working with myself, then I also work with other people that specialize in Israeli pensions. So again, I would say just doing a real assessment in terms of, your income needs, your income streams, understanding, so to speak, okay, what does that mean if I want to retire at the age of 60 and I only going to start getting a Social Security at 70, because I want to get that larger lump sum. Or if I, want to only start receiving my pensions in Israel at the age of 67. So now I have another, 7 years basically to float myself, income wise. How do we create that income? There's a lot of opportunities to create, to invest and create, income driven strategies, with obviously looking at it from a tax perspective too. Okay. Rafi, you want to move?
1 second, sorry. Having some technical problems here.
That's okay. Oh, I also mentioned that on the US side, I sort of mentioned it here on the slide, dealing with different types of retirement accounts, IRAs, Roth IRAs, all that kind of stuff. Please speak to a financial advisor. Please speak to, especially if you're about to make Aliyah or you're planning Aliyah. You might have been saving in a certain way because you're, living in America, and this type of retirement account made a lot of sense. It could be that, it's a very gray area, and it also depends on how your accountant works, you know, and how they treat these type of funds. So it's very, very important to, before doing any major, you know, so like, you know, people want to convert their traditional IRA to a Roth, you know, before doing big things like that, it's very important to speak to a professional who can then guide you in terms of all those types of things, because it could be that, you know, a Roth IRA is actually taxed in Israel, right? For example. So we need to coordinate everything, you know, with a good tax advisor as well.
It's like I'm still just, there you go.
No problem. And I have a couple more minutes. So, I mean, again, just to recap, so to speak, you know, it's important to do the research, to speak to people that are living in Israel, where you're in your community, understand your expenses, look at all your assets and investments, take advantage of the tax holiday if you're making Aliyah, and coordinate it with a financial advisor. If you need help on the financial, you know, planning side, and you know, obviously on the investment management side, you can reach out to someone like myself who really deals with dual citizens in that sense. Looking obviously into, you know, protecting your assets, looking at your insurances, your healthcare stuff. That's also very critical. Tax planning and estate planning, all these things, they sound very, very overwhelming, but if you work with the right professional who can really help you network and coordinate all this stuff, it does not have to be as complicated as it can feel. And like I said, you know, trying to find the right investments that make sense for you, for your portfolio, you know, the right mix of shekel and non-shekel investments. All these types of things are very important to look at. Thank you for listening. It's a bit weird speaking and not seeing anybody, but you know, feel free to reach out. I never say no to a call or a Zoom. For a free introductory call, please feel free to reach out. I'll see how I can best you know, help you. And thank you very much. And I'll stick around later for additional questions for anybody.
Thank you, Aaron. Just I'm still having some technical issues here. It seems like my screen is frozen. I'm just trying to get
It gives people more time to write down my contact details.
Yeah, it's just Paul, I don't know if you can see this, the window that says participants, and just we have to make Eliana a presenter.
Okay, let me see. Yeah, Eliana is about 20 down.
Okay, actually, I think okay, I'm back up here. I'll add her on. Okay, fix my tech issues. So okay.
Now, while we're waiting for Eliana, so if there's anyone out there who's interested in joining some of the existing groups or are interested in setting up a group in their community, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and we'll see if we can accommodate you.
Yeah, just waiting for Eliana to log on here.
Should I try answering a couple of questions here, or?
Yeah, go ahead. Eliana's just having a problem turning on her phone or her camera. So
I'm just looking at a few questions here. Second. So just generally, Mandy Levine asks about issues where to, you know, wants to make Aliyah, not sure where to stay, job, school, and language. I think it just starts with working with an Olim advisors and a Nefesh B'Nefesh, or, you know, or a combination of them to help you and friends and family and to research where is the most appropriate community for you to start. And I really highly recommend also just going to a community and not buying anything, just, you know, renting first, just to see how it you know, it pans out. Okay, Eliana's here, so
I wish it was that easy that you could like rent a plan for a short time, and then, you know, that would be good. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Eliana Aaron. and I'm here to talk about healthcare in Israel, which is a lot of fun. So there's a lot of very positive, good things that I can give you confidence about. Israel is ranked one of the best health systems in the world, which is great. They just ranked Sheba Hospital, I think, number 8 in the world. And that's very exciting. So I think there were like 6 American hospitals. There was 1 Swedish hospital, and there's Sheba Hospital. So there's a lot of good things going on in healthcare. Israel has the longest, has the 5th longest longevity. People live the longest who live in Israel, other than like South Korea and Japan, a few places like that. But certainly that's really a wonderful thing. I'm going to get straight into the practical things because there's a lot of questions. I've been working with Olim since I moved here 23 years ago. And so I became very much an expert at this, and my company is built on that expertise. So the system in Israel is such that everyone has what we would probably say in America is an HMO. Every resident in Israel is required to have health insurance through one of the 4 HMOs in Israel, but those are not equal. They're supposed to provide the same services, and they do, but they're not all the same. Some are better in some parts of the country. Some are better in other parts of the country. Some are a little bit more English speaking friendly, but in only certain geographic areas. So it's a little bit complicated. So the 4 kupot are Klalit, which has a share, I just have the numbers right here. They have a share of 52% of all of the HMO services in the country, and they have some hospitals, but it's the poorest kupa. So even though they have the most clinics and the most members, they're the oldest kupa and they're the poorest kupa. And that has some effect on the doctors that they get to go in there. Maccabi has about 28% of the Kupa membership in the country. Mu'chedet is about 12.5%, and Leumit is about 7.5%. So, so that's basically what you have in Israel. And very much depending on the geographic location you're planning to move in, will tell you what kupot are better for your needs. So I'll start with the easiest one, which is the periphery. All right, so if people are planning to move south, planning to move north, Klalit is the strongest kupa in those areas because Klalit started off in the kibbutzim and in the small little towns of the periphery, like 100 years ago almost. So that still is quite dominant in those peripheral areas. So the other kupot are just not, they're present, but they're weaker. Maccabi is okay in those areas, but not as good as Klalit. So that's something to think about. But for most of the Olim who move to the center areas of the country, close to a city where most of the Anglos live, then you're usually talking about the other 3 kupot. Because Klalit is not, has fewer doctors, let's say, that speak English in those areas. And so people tend to steer away from Klalit who make Aliyah from English-speaking countries, unless they live in those peripheral areas. So so basically, the other thing that you need to consider besides location is do you have any pre-existing issues, and who are the specialists in those pre-existing issues? You want to make sure if you're coming to Israel, and people who come over the age of 60 almost always have some pre-existing conditions. You want to make sure that in the area you're moving in, that you have specialists who are there from your kupa, or that you have access to specialists that are not too far away. So that's also an important consideration. when you're choosing a kupa. All of the kupot have different levels that you can up pay for additional services. So they're all called something else, but each kupa has different levels besides the required basket that you can opt in for. Most Olim opt in for whatever the highest level is of their kupa, because it gives them a little more coverage. I would say if they need to go and have private private surgery, it reimburses a bit higher. A lot of the add-ons that they throw into those higher level services are not things that people use on a regular basis. And so a lot of those services are things that you in theory are paying for, but are not going to use. But for the things that you might use, it's nice to have the little bit extra coverage. So people do pay for it. That add-on per month is not very expensive for younger people, but as you get older, it does get a little bit more expensive, and eventually it gets to be a couple $100 a month, maybe a bit more than that actually, depending on your age, and it does cap off at a certain point. Again, most people do opt for that highest level of service, but it doesn't always mean that you're going to get a lot of extra services because of that. So you have to keep that in mind. Now, supplemental insurance, about 80% of Israelis have a supplemental insurance. A lot of that's through the kupot. Okay, people pay for that. But about 60% of Israelis have private insurance in addition to the HMO. And that does cover quite a few things that the HMO is not going to cover. The Coupa is not going to cover certain tests. There's certain additional fees you could pay to have expedited MRIs, for example. You can wait many months sometimes to get an MRI in Israel. And if you pay for this extra service, they'll make sure you get it within 2 days. It's very nice, but you have to pay for that. And they also reimburse for private payment for seeing doctors and for tests and for other things. And there's different levels in there. And again, as you get older, like everything else, like all insurance, it does get more expensive. So it's great when you're younger, when you're probably not going to use it. But as you get older, it does become important to have that extra coverage in the event that you need it. And that's really the issue. So there are quite a few different plans. And again, having that insurance broker is important to discuss, what would be good level of coverage for you. That also includes, for some people, it could include additional nursing care if you ever need it, above and beyond what the Coupa will pay for. The Coupa pays for a certain amount, like a couple of years, and then the other insurance will kick in after that for a period of time. It's not open-ended, but it does help in situations like that. Hopefully we don't need it. The system, like an HMO in America, goes basically everything is filtered into that family doctor. So we call it a family doctor here. It could be an internist, it could be a pediatrician for a child, and it could be a family doctor. Family doctors here are the ones who have to sort of process any specialist reports that you've had and to put into the system referrals that you need, tests that you need, and things like that. If you go to a Coupa specialist, they can also do referrals and tests. But when you go to a private doctor, then you have to go with that document to your family doctor with the recommendations, and they have to put it into the system. So it's, that's the system. And it works pretty well. It's very much an electronic health record. The good thing is you can really access quite a lot of things online. The problem is it's in Hebrew. And there is no Coupa that has an English, a functional English app, or even a functional medical hotline where you could speak to a health professional in English. And this became a big deal during Corona when people had to call the Ministry of Health and they had to report certain things or ask certain questions, and you press 4 for English and you got it. So I don't speak English. So it's actually really important to keep in mind that accessing healthcare is challenging. The app is in Hebrew in all of the kupot. So Maccabi has now, I think it's a test run, but they have a company that does English speaking administrative work, but it's not a place where you're going to get any medical answers. And it's right now sort of in a beta run. So they're testing it out to see if it's being used and how it's being used. But I think the main issue is that people don't know what to do. What do I do if I have to go to the hospital? Because if you go to the hospital and you don't have a referral, you're going to get charged for that emergency room visit. And that could be, it's probably about 1,500 shekels. It could be more. So the normal way that you deal with that is you have to call the kupa 24 hours a day and you have to speak to the nurse, and the nurse is going to give you a referral in the system so that you're covered for the emergency room. To avoid overuse of emergency rooms, there are other options that they prefer you use if it's not a life-threatening emergency. There is also a way, if you have to go to the emergency room, to get retroactive coverage. And that system does work well, but using the emergency room for non-emergencies will not be covered. So people don't use, so that's really good because like in America, the emergency room can get swarmed with people who just, have the flu. And so they're trying to keep people away from the emergency room in Israel. And there are urgent care centers that have a partial coverage. You have a copayment. Some of the kupot are not paying for any of it anymore. I think Me'uchedet stopped paying for it, but in some parts of the country. But that's another option that you have, but that is not a good place for primary care. The place for primary care, you're not going to get good doctors in an urgent care center for the most part. You have to have a family doctor. So speaking to people in your neighborhood about who is a good English-speaking primary care doctor is also going to help direct you on the Kupat Cholim you choose in the end. There are co-payments for a lot of the things that they cover. Okay, so every month it's automatically deducted from your account. The medications, you have to pay a co-payment for medications. It's depending on the coverage percentage of the medication, it's usually not a lot of money. So for example, a fully subsidized medication, when I say fully subsidized, it's the highest level of subsidy, will cost 13 shekels, which is not a lot of money. I think maybe it's 14 shekels now. But some medication, there's a 50% copayment. Those are some of the more expensive medications. There are some medications that don't have any copayment. Over-the-counter medicines and supplies you have to pay for. Orthopedic supplies, if you have a referral, it gets paid by the kupa, and so on and so on. So I'm not going to get into too many details because it could be very technical, but copayments do accrue, and you pay it once a month automatically out of your bank account. And the payments to the insurance go through Bituach Leumi. So if you are working, automatically that tax is deducted from your paycheck, and that's what you pay for Bituach Leumi, which is Social Security, and for your health tax. It's all in one lump sum. And so that's the basic system of how that works. If you go to, there are two levels of private doctors. There's a completely private doctor where you pay out of pocket for the doctor. That could be a few $100s equivalent. Again, if you have private insurance, you can get paid back. Sometimes the Coupa will give you some reimbursement, usually not. But you could take that document, bring it to your family doctor, and then all the recommendations could be put into the system. So you don't have to pay for everything privately. When you're talking about going to a doctor that is partially subsidized, it means you pay 200 shekels. You could choose from specialists that are on the list from your kupa, and then the kupa pays the rest of the doctor's fee. So not every doctor is on this, but there are quite a few options that are on this, and that does give a more affordable option for a private doctor. So that would be for specialist referrals. So, the person who ends up helping you a lot in the Kupat Olim system is a medical secretary. Okay, they know the system from the inside, so they know what you need to do, and it could be complicated. It's a nationalized system. It's, you don't have to submit bills most of the time to anybody, so it's better than what you have to do in America with private insurance. But it's really, you have to get the referral, then you have to make that appointment, then you have to go to that doctor, and then take that document back to the family doctor, and then they have to put it in the system, and then you have to sort of go through your list. Okay, what do I have to do? She gave me a referral for physical therapy. I have to make that appointment. She gave me a referral for a specialist. There isn't a specialist in my area. I have to go to a hospital clinic, or I have to go private. I have to make that appointment. And so this is, there is a system. You have to keep organized, and it does work. There are, because it is socialized medicine, there are things that take longer to get appointments for, like certain radiology tests, like MRIs. They could take quite a while to get appointments for. And they run MRI machines 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So you could get an appointment at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's one of the reasons why people, when they choose private insurance, they will also potentially decide they're going to pay extra to get that shortcut appointment for these tests. But if not, then, again, the country is pretty healthy. We have a good system here. It's not as efficient as we'd like it to be, but it is inexpensive relative to what you have in America. And it's a better quality system than what you have, let's say, in Canada, so and England. So that's really an important thing also, is you have to sort of understand how that system works and what step to do next. So coordinating is important. And and it could be complicated. I mean, I've had people make Aliyah with cancer. I've had people make Aliyah. I've had clients who made Aliyah with very complex, rare conditions. And they had successful aliyahs, and they were able to continue their care. One thing I'm going to really say when we go to tips and tricks, so I'm kind of going towards the end because sometimes there's a lot of questions, is you have to have a good record that's organized before you come here. If you have a pre-existing condition, okay? If you don't, then it doesn't really matter. But if you have a pre-existing condition, like most people do, you have to have your most recent specialist report, your most recent labs, if relevant, what your treatment plan is, and bring your medication for the first couple of months if you can, so that by the time you get into the system and get all of your diagnosis in with the family doctor, that you still have everything from the States, and that the transition is smoother. I've had people not do this and then call in a panic, I ran out of medication. Well, if you make Aliyah on a Thursday, Friday and Shabbos are a weekend, you can't get an appointment. I can't preset an appointment with a Kupa doctor until you have a Tudat Zehut number when you make Aliyah. So you can't make an appointment with a public system until after the Aliyah. So it means I couldn't make an appointment until you make Aliyah. So then you make an appointment for later that week and you go in. So it could take a week or two to get things in the system, assuming it's not the holidays and not family vacation. In August, people take off. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration. It's a Jewish country. So the Jewish doctors are taking off for the holidays. They're taking off for Shabbos. They're taking off for Chagim and for Chol HaMoed. So the same time that you would want to take off, the doctors are taking off. And the same thing, by the way, happens in the hospitals. You go into Shabbat mode, and the hospital staff, like it is in America on weekends, goes down a lot. Okay, so you may have half the staff there on the weekend. On the other hand, patients who are stable in the hospital often are allowed to go home for Shabbat and then come back to the hospital after Shabbat. Same thing for the Same thing for the holidays. It's a little bit weird. They don't do that in the States because if you're well enough to go home, you should not be in the hospital. But this does happen in Israel. And it's weird because you'll have people not able to get beds because there's not enough beds, but the beds are empty and reserved for the person who's home with their family because they're on Shabbos holiday. So it's one of those weird, Israeli Jewish things, but okay. I got used to it. So I want people to make Aliyah and to bring their documents in an organized way, to bring a summary of everything, all the diagnoses and their medication. Medication-wise, most medications are available here. Sometimes the dosing is different. And so your doctor has to figure out when you come here how to adjust that if needed. And so that's why if an adjustment is needed, then sometimes you need a specialist to be involved in that decision. So it's good to have a couple of months of medication so you don't have to panic about it. I had a patient come in who was on a specific medicine for a heart condition that was not available in the same dose here. And the family doctor said, look, you have to see a cardiologist to decide how to manipulate this medication. So by the time you get the referral, and then you have to get the appointment and et cetera, and they didn't want to go private. Private usually means you can see someone faster. They were, already in their third or fourth week living in Israel without a medication adjustment, but they had taken their medicine with them. So they didn't have to worry about it. We took care of it. But stuff like that happens, and that's fine. I have lots of examples. I don't have to bore you with them. I would also say that when you make Aliyah with children, also you should know where children with pre-existing conditions, where are the depending on what the problem is, where do they have good access to the ancillary services that children need? Okay, so there's such thing here as Hitpathut Hayeled, which means child development. Every kupa has child development center, and it's multidisciplinary. It's very integrated, which is great, but not every area has it. So if your child is somebody who needs that kind of treatment, it's important to be in an area where you can access those services also. So keep that in mind for choosing a kupa and also choosing where you're going to live because you want to be able to access those services. Let me just think, is there anything else that is standing out that I need to tell you about making Aliyah? I think that's it. I think that's my summary.
It's definitely a great overview. Thank you so much, Dr. Aaron. And I agree with you. I think, like we were talking about before you joined, that planning and preparing is the key here, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's finding specialists. A lot of times we'll tell people if you have a cardiologist, let's say if you live in New York or Sydney, talk to your cardiologists. Very often they know doctors in Israel, they know specialists in Israel that they can recommend. And so the more research that you can do beforehand, the easier it will be for you when you get to Israel. And of course, there's companies like Dr. Aaron's company, EmaCare, that will guide you and hold your hand when you get here. But a lot of the stress and concern can be addressed by planning and preparing and doing the research beforehand.
Right. And I would say also that the way that doctors in the States have Israeli contacts is through international conferences. And they make friends with some of these doctors. Now, sometimes they've actually worked together, and sometimes they just know them from the conference. And here I know somebody. And that person may not be exactly the specialist that you need. That person may not be, somebody who works with the HMO that you need. So it doesn't always work out. I find that it only works out like that about 20% of the time. But sometimes they're right on the marks, and that happens. And also there are a lot of doctors who volunteered in Israel and really know the doctors here and have worked with them. That's a whole different level of referral because then they know clinically what they're capable of. So it depends on how they know them, but it's a good place to start because one doctor will refer you to another doctor. I had somebody make Aliyah with a very specific pacemaker that is not common. And there was only one place in Israel that managed it and one doctor who was familiar with it. So we had to go to that one doctor in that one hospital who was going to be managing this particular pacemaker. So, so things like that come up also. And so it's important to keep in mind that you can start somewhere, but it may not be where you need to end up. And the system here is different, meaning that some doctors that in America do certain activities, in Israel they don't. I'll give you a very easy example. In America, a dermatologist will do a skin biopsy and will help to treat your skin cancer, will actually, take out your skin cancer. In Israel, the dermatologist does not do any procedures. You have to go to a surgeon. So it's just something that's different here that you wouldn't know about unless you lived here and you knew, what people do. So that's, pretty much like a gynecologist or an OBGYN will not do a breast exam. So when a woman needs to have a breast exam, they have to go to a breast surgeon, not a regular surgeon, but a breast surgeon. But they're the only ones who will do an exam. So these are the kind of things that you need to know. So, yeah.
I would add, Rafi, can I add just in terms from a financial planning perspective, understanding the supplemental health, private health insurance is very important. At least, and you can really create a plan, that's rather robust versus also just mitigating the large catastrophes in my mind. Those catastrophes could be, needing a transplant abroad, certain surgeries abroad, medications that are not in the basket in the Salabariut, which could cost, 25,000-30,000 shekels a month. So at minimum, if you're eligible, again, depending on your age, I believe it's 69. I don't know if you can get it after 69. But you should really look into, and that's something you should do immediately. If you're making Aliyah, day one, speak to somebody who can help put you in touch with a good insurance agent, somebody who can then get you set up with that.
Yeah.
It's critical because, you don't want to be exposed financially to that type of risk.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. Should I answer some of the questions that are coming up on the Q&A?
Yeah, please, and then we'll go back also to Aaron and some financial questions. So we have about 10 minutes or so. So if you want to go through some of those, please do.
Sure. So somebody's asking that they're moving to Ashkelon. They have a serious specific issue, who they will be treating in either Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, which are, two of the larger medical areas in the country, let's say. And is it more important to be in a good kuppah where you live or where your specialist is? So if you have a serious condition or a rare condition, then usually the kuppah will pay for you to go to a hospital clinic. Most of the time, the hospital clinics are where the top specialized doctors are because they have all of the access to the testing. Now, the top doctors will also see private patients elsewhere. I'm assuming you're not asking about private care. So in other words, the issue with Clalit, for example, is that they may say, we only want you to go to a specialist who's in a Clalit hospital. So that could be a problem. If you have justification that you need to go to a specific hospital, because Clalit hospitals, there aren't any in Jerusalem, and I think there's one in Tel Aviv. Most of the Clalit hospitals are in the periphery. But all the other Kupot will let you go to, wherever you want to go. But you could probably be referred to a hospital clinic. Now, the disadvantage of a hospital clinic is you don't get to choose your doctor. Because you end up seeing a resident. So in a situation like this, what would be going on is that through your kuppah, hopefully, your specialist doctor will be on their short list of doctors that you'll pay the 200 shekel copayment and be able to see. And that's like a semi-private appointment. And that would be the best solution. So I would want to know if that doctor that you want to see is on the short list for the kuppah that you want to choose in Ashkelon. If not, then it's a little bit harder because you'll go to a public clinic and you'll be in a good, facility with good faculty and good staff, but maybe not with the specific doctor that you want to see because, again, when you're in a public hospital, you get a resident usually, and it's not the same. So I hope that answered. Does a private insurance exclude pre-existing conditions? Yes, they do, but the Coupa does not. How much does additional private health insurance cost? It varies because there are so many different packages, so I can't even answer that. It depends on your age and what you choose. Again, getting to a good broker is the key, and you need to do that when you move to Israel. No, not each household member needs to have the same insurance, but when you have a baby in Israel, the baby automatically gets the same Coupa as the mother. That's the only time where there's an automatic decision. You can also change Coupot every 6 months. You can change Coupot, but there's a problem. When you make Aliyah, you qualify to get those higher level coverage systems within the Coupa. As soon as you change, you no longer qualify to automatically get them, and then you have to sort of, pay into them before they let you have those services. So if you want to switch from Maccabi to Muchedet, for example, and you made Aliyah, you're on Maccabi, you have the highest level of Maccabi. When you move to Muchedet, you're going to have to pay into the higher level system for a period of time before they'll let you get any of those services, because they don't want the sick people from one Coupa to go to another. They want the sick people to stay where they are. So that's what they do. Okay.
I see
Okay,
here, sorry if we can just switch for a moment just to
sure.
finance. I don't know. So there's a question here about traditional IRAs, and I know there are a lot of people here who are thinking about retiring or have retired and are living in Israel. Can you just briefly talk about, the
Right.
Roth and traditional
So,
IRAs and how it impacts people living in Israel?
right. So I would say it depends again on how your accountant can help you there, but and also depends on where you are in your tax aliyah. So for example, someone I think asked about within your 10 years. So you're not going to be taxed in Israel. If it's income in the States and you're liquidating your IRA or withdrawing from your IRA, you'll be subject to. So if it's a traditional, you'll be subject to U.S. taxes. If it's a Roth, you're not going to be subject to, either Israel or the U.S. during that period of time. After your 10 years, that's where it becomes more complicated. And personally, where we are working on with some accountants on some potential interesting tax solutions for clients. So if you want to get in touch, please feel free to do that. But yeah, so I hope that, I mean, it's definitely an area which is confusing. But yeah, so again, during your 10-year holiday, again, if you're leaving in the States and it's coming out of your U.S. income, so whatever taxation situation you are there, you'll be taxed, but in Israel, no. After your 10 years, then that's where it becomes more problematic.
Dr. Aaron, there's a question here about making Aliyah with parents, and we get that a lot, right? It's amazing, especially during COVID. We saw more and more people who wanted to make Aliyah so they could come back and forth, and also the lifestyle for retirees in Israel is amazing. And so beforehand, people would move to Florida or Arizona, and we're seeing more and more people coming here because they want to be with their kids and their grandkids, and their kids are bringing in their elderly parents. In fact, we had an employee who brought their father and mother from Teaneck, New Jersey. The father was 101 and the mother was 97. And it was an amazing story. And Baruch Hashem, they're living in Netanya and they're happy. And so can you talk a little bit about that and what you can do to set it up for parents, elderly parents who might want to make Aliyah?
Yeah. So a lot of this has to do with the level of function of the elderly parent. So in the situation of the 101-year-old father, who's now 103, by the way, and still kicking. But it depends on their situation. I had two aunts who made Aliyah at 94 and 97, and they went to a retirement facility, and they were very happy. But assuming that you're interested in taking people home, there is a system here that is complicated even for Israelis, but in the end can get a lot of the things that parents might want and might need. So, for example, Israel very much depends on foreign workers for home care. Okay, so a foreign worker will live with you and take care of an elderly disabled parent if they're at that stage. So to qualify to do that, you have to go through the whole Social Security system, Bituach Leumi, and you have to get evaluated, and you have to get, you have to get examined, and they have to make sure that you really need it. And at the end of that process, which can take a few months, you can qualify to bring in a foreign worker through one of the agencies that does this. In the meantime, you can hire private people. That's where it kind of gets a little bit difficult because no matter what, you do have to pay for this person. It's not a freebie, but um, but you have to organize the care kind of yourself until you're in the system. So there might be an adjustment period where if you're bringing a disabled parent, for example, where you need to arrange for someone to help you at home, and that's entirely out of your pocket and it has to be arranged. So a lot of people actually, interestingly enough, they will move to Israel with their aide temporarily, who's on a tourist visa. I've seen this happen a lot. They stay for 3 months, and they're helping in the family and helping with the person until we're able to get that person into the system. That is an option, but basically, you have to keep in mind that someone who's elderly in Israel, most people stay home when they age. The retirement facilities are very pricey. Some of them are beautiful, but they're all very pricey, and you have to be able to afford it. It's a lot. So it depends on, now going back to Aaron, it depends on your financial situation. Money will make things easier. But the elderly have a lot of benefits here also. The hearing aids are paid for and other things and et cetera. So and there's a lot of different levels of coverage. So the care for the elderly is getting better here. It's good, but it does take much longer to get them in the system. And that's an important point. So you have to bring that into account when you make Aliyah. But, a lot of people are making Aliyah with elderly parents now, and it's doable.
Right.
Right.
And
So
then
I
there's
would
a question.
definitely allocate, a lot of money towards that. If that's part of the plan, then you really need to take that into account. So so from a financial perspective, if you want to be able to put if they want to be in a facility at some point, then having the funds to finance that is critical. Like I said earlier, a lot of times people pour a lot of money over the years into long-term care, and it ends up being obsolete when they get here, which is highly unfortunate. But that's a situation. And another plus of having a foreign worker is, as a Shabbat goy, I can attest to that being a benefit. But anyway.
Thank you. We have a couple more minutes. Just a quick question here. I don't think Dr. Aaron talked about dental and eye care, and if that's included in the package.
Okay, so dental care for children is included in the Kupat Cholim package if you go to the Kupat Cholim dental plan, okay, which is usually quite good. I'm trying to think what the cutoff age is. It might be 8 or 9. It goes down to they pay for one doctor's visit and maybe one hygienist a year, something like that. But there is some coverage. Orthodonture, if you go through the Coupa, also it's somewhat cheaper, but a lot of people opt for private at that point. It's a lot cheaper than it is in the States because the specialists that they have in the Coupa are not always sort of on par with the level that you might be happy with. But again, like I had a daughter who had braces and it was like I think it was $2,000 for the whole thing. In America, it would have been a lot more than that. So I was actually like, wow, that's actually a great price. So it's about a quarter of the price. Sorry?
I have a daughter with braces now, and it was half the price going, for the Kupaf versus the private. We like to go private for a variety of reasons, because just many times it's convenience, like getting an appointment and whatever. So sometimes you have to weigh the other factors when you're making decisions, not just on the wellness side.
Right, but it's also relative to America, it's about a quarter of the price. So it is subsidized, but again, often what I have found is that the Coupa specialist doctors, not the dentist, but the specialist dentists are not necessarily the top people. So a lot of people, when they need dental surgery, are going to go private and stuff like that. And eye care, so ophthalmologists are doctors. Optometry is there. So when you have the higher level of the Coupa coverage, each Coupa is allowed to pick and choose what they want to cover. So some Coupot will pay, will subsidize optometry visit, I think once every year, 2 years, and they'll even subsidize a pair of glasses, I think every 2 to 5 years, depending on the glasses. The selection of frames is usually kind of old-fashioned relative to what's in style, because they give you the cheaper frames. But there is an option for that, and all the medical eye care is covered. So
Great. I think we have time for one last
Eliana,
question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, Eliana, several people asked me questions about as they transition to a full Aliyah. So maybe they make Aliyah, but they're still spending 25% in the US, and they're trying to manage their healthcare between the US and Israel. Any tips for those type of people?
Well, what I would say, and I'm very familiar with that, is that if you have an issue that requires an MRI, just do it in the States. It's probably going to be faster. You could get it done in like 2 days. So I would say that is definitely a tip I would do, rather than go at 3 o'clock in the morning and 4 months from now. So that I would definitely say, but I would say that as you transition, you need to find the right person in Israel who's going to manage the issue, the problem you're having, or the diagnosis, before you all of a sudden decide to cut it off. Because that, in other words, I like to say, okay, let's first find where you're going, and then what documents they want, and then we'll go back for the last time to your doctor in the States and be able to bring what you need here. So that I would say is definitely the smoothest transitions that I've seen are like that. They're well planned. And, we help people do that. We even set up, where you could see the doctor here, and then you say, yeah, I really like him, he's good. And then we say, okay, we're making the transition. And sometimes you go through a couple of doctors till you find someone that you really feel is appropriate for you. And that's okay too.
Great. Okay, I think we've gotten to the end of our time. I just want to thank everyone for joining tonight. As Rabbi Bloom mentioned, we're doing a lot of these kind of grassroots meetings and groups in the different communities throughout the country. So if you are interested in having one set up in the town or city that you live or nearby, let Rabbi Bloom know. I actually forgot to include a slide for his contact information. So Rabbi Bloom, if you want to just share your email address, and of course, when you send out a recording, we'll include your phone number as well. But if you want to just share your email address with everybody, they can reach out to you if they're interested in doing so. That'd be great.
Sure. So my email is P as in Paul, D as in David, Bloom, BLOOM as in Mary, the number 1 at gmail.com. And we are having a session on March 23rd in the Upper West Side. So for people who may be in that area, may be interested in joining, please let me know.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. We wish you a lot of success, and please reach out to us if you have any other questions. Have a good week, a safe week, and be well. Take care, everyone. Shavuot Tov.
And Purim Sameach.